Okay, good afternoon and thank you everyone for joining us for the online Minerals to Metals Forum hosted by the Southern African Institute for Mining and Metallurgy. During the discussion, please type your question in the Q&A section. This you will find in the toolbox at the bottom of your screen. After the presentations, we will have a Q&A session to answer these questions. You may raise your hand at that time to speak to the panelists directly. Please note that this forum is recorded and will be made available to the public. If you would like to remain anonymous by changing your name, you can do so, or you can leave your questions in the Q&A section. If you have any issues or would like to be added to the mailing list, please send me a private message in the chat. Today's topic for discussion is a systems analysis of conflict and development outcomes related to coltan and cobalt trade in the DRC. Today we have Dr. Byelongo Elisee Isheloke, a business economist with interests in mining economics, mineral beneficiation policy interventions, and the green economy. We have with him Professor Harro von Blottnitz, a professor in the Faculty of Engineering and the Built Environment at the University of Cape Town, leading the Energy and Industrial Systems Research in the Chemical Engineering Department. First, we will have Harro giving a little brief introduction, I think is according to my eavesdropping earlier.
Thank you very much, Aysha. I have been around the minerals to metals since it started well over a decade ago at UCT. And it's been really exciting to see the forum, which some of the postgrad students in minerals to metals invented a couple of years ago, to see that forum now being co-hosted by the SAIMM and the very interesting research work that we do at the University of Cape Town in our minerals to metals, getting this platform to be shared across Southern Africa. So we are excited to have today's audience. We had the good fortune a couple of years ago of being able to offer a postdoc research fellowship to the main speaker for today after he completed a PhD at the Durban University of Technology. And I say the good fortune because we've, like most South African scholars, have had a blind spot for the Francophone parts of Africa. And certainly within the SADC and mining and minerals in the SADC, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is a very important mining jurisdiction with unique minerals that also are becoming very important for the global energy transition. And of course, it's got a troubled history and its development path is much debated. So what we're offering you today is a systems analysis look at these debates. And maybe I'll just start with a little warning. Most people are detail people and only a few are systems people. I'm one of the few who's a kind of systems thinker. And it sounds grand what we do. Sounds like we get the whole picture. Often though, I have to warn you, it's a bit of a letdown. Once a systems analyst has looked at it and tells, has looked at a whole bunch of trees and tells you it's just a forest, a lot of people then say, oh, it's just a forest. That wasn't rocket science to see that it's a forest. So maybe all that you walk away from today is to see that it's a forest and not just a collection of trees. But let's see how it goes. I hand over to Dr. Byelongo Isheloke to take us through the first part of the presentation, and I'll come in at the time when we step back to see what kind of forest it is. Byelongo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Harro von Blottnitz, for the wonderful opening remarks, and Aysha for a very wonderful introduction as well. And welcome to you, all of you, my virtual audience. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Without any delay, let us then focus on the business of the day. So we are going to be talking about systems analysis of conflict and development outcomes related to coltan and cobalt in the DRC. While I start this presentation, Professor von Blottnitz will join me later on in the very presentation. Now, just to give you an overview of this today's work, I'm going to introduce it and tell you some background information, and we'll tell you the objective that we set for this study and the theories that we deemed applicable to this research. And we will tell you about methodological approach that we followed and the outputs that we came up with as we gathered information, as we scrutinized, data from the DRC, as we learned and as we engage with the multitude of information will also be given to you before concluding. So this presentation is about two similar sounding minerals, coltan and cobalt. And coltan is short for columbite, tantalite, that yield niobium and tantalum. It's a mineral in high demand in the cell phone manufacturing, and cobalt is as strategic as coltan. Sometimes occurring with copper, and in the instance of the DRC, it's also occur with nickel. It might be different from a place to another, and it is also in high demand. It is in high demand for batteries. This era of electrical vehicle market growing, and some historical background. The DRC, as we know it today, the Democratic Republic of Congo, has a very rich history, and it has been a history where the predicament that we see today has been repeatedly experienced over the years. When I see it, it was part of the Kingdom of Congo that was formed in 1890 and came to an end in 1914. And it stretched towards Cameroon. It includes the Gabon, the Congo Brazzaville, and Angola. Actually, the capital city of that Kingdom of Congo was in the actual Angola. But the Congo as we know it today also includes actually what has been formed by the inclusion of other kingdoms. So, like we have the kingdoms of Luba, for example. We have also other many chiefdoms, like we have the chiefdoms of the Fizi, Kalembe, and where the Bembe people live. But there are so many, communities came together to form what we know today as the DRC. And already in history, it traded with Portugal, because the Portuguese were the first Europeans who come to come in touch with the Congolese people then. And they came with cotton, they came with salt and fabric, and they took copper, they took ivory, and they took slaves, they took human beings. So it was not a win-win cooperation from start when they came to Africa, the Portuguese. And they also brought Christianity. But after the Portuguese in 1914, as I told you, there was this conflict. The Congolese rebelled against the Portuguese. The kingdom came to an end, it split. And later on, we found the Belgians came as well. In 1885, in the Berlin Conference, the King Leopold II was managed to convince the super powerful countries then that he should be in charge of that region, and he named it the Congo Free State, État indépendant du Congo. And that État indépendant du Congo, Congo Free State, was then what the country the state was called from 1885 to 1908. And until the 1960s, when Lumumba and others, his acolytes, managed to get, I would say by force, the independence from Belgium. And the country was known as Zaire in 1971, but in 1997, it got back the name of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We had to wait until 2006 for the first democratic elections in 2006. Now, just to give you some more figures about the DRC, it's a huge country of over 2,345,000 square kilometers. Actually is almost twice the size of South Africa, 4 times the size of France, 80 times, I think, the size of Belgium. A huge country, almost the size of the Western Europe, and we've currently, an estimation of 90 million people living in this country. But we're going to see just now the predicament that the people live under. The GDP of the DRC in 2018 was $47.23 billion US, and the Human Development Index was 0.459, making it 179th country, poorest country out of 189 countries that were surveyed in 2009. And we've got a GDP per capita of 561.78 US dollar. But as we know, the GDP isn't a very good economic indicator if you want to know about the life account of people living in a country. Perhaps using a Gini coefficient would be better. And the Gini index of the DRC is 42.20, which makes it one of the poorest countries in the world. The Gini coefficient actually takes into account the standard of living and income distribution, and and as well income revenue disparity in a country, which makes it a better economic indicator. It makes a country so endowed, well endowed in mineral resources, to be also one of the poorest in the country, which is very sad. So it is, just to tell you some of the wealth of the DRC, the riches of the DRC, it has 80% of the world coltan deposits, and 30% of your diamond are found in one area, in Kasai, mined industrially, but also there are also other diamond mines in the northwest of the DRC. So maybe 40% of the diamond reserves are in the DRC, and we've got it's a country very rich. Actually, it's estimated that 34 trillion US dollar worth of mineral deposit. What did I say? 34? Yes, 34 trillion US dollar. Actually, it was known that it was 24 trillion US dollars, but last year, during the mining week, the government came up with these new figures that it's now known that it's 34 trillion US dollars worth of mineral deposits. Knowing that South Africa is 2.5 trillion US dollars worth of minerals, South Africa, it's not wrong to say that the DRC could be more than 12 times richer than South Africa potentially on the account of minerals, so mineral-wise. And 3 largest copper mines, just to give an example, to put things into perspectives, 3 largest copper mines yielded 40% of your world production. Companies like Glencore, Flaret and Freeport, the 3 companies, companies like these, produce a lot. So copper, we already said that it's important in the armament industry, and there is, because of that implication, there is geopolitical interference of super powerful countries wanting to have a say in what is happening in the DRC. So it's also rich in crude oil. It's actually the fourth richest country in oil in Africa, 4th after Angola. We have 180 million barrels in oil reserves, which is more, I think, 2 days of global production. That's the capacity as known today for the DRC on oil, aspect of things. And we've got, 70% of all your world reserves in cobalt. And cobalt is a strategic mineral, increasing demand in lithium. And we had a wonderful presentation last week. We told that we also have gold, like in the Eastern DRC, in Ituri, and in Elisee, gold is also mined in DRC. And in one instance, 10 to 15 tons of gold were produced in 2015 in the DRC. And, and that we had a situation of $838 million US tax, huge. But this business of gold is prone to illicit trade, as it happens in the volatile Eastern region. You could be asking yourself, what is the objective of such a study of this magnitude? The objective is twofold. First, to develop an understanding why, despite immense mineral wealth, the DRC's development outcomes are poor. Secondly, specifically to focus on 2 mining products uniquely associated with the DRC, coltan and cobalt. Now we use for this study the resource curse. In 2004, an economist, Elisee, came up with a very interesting, theory. He said, nations that, I quote, nations that depend heavily on their natural resources tend to have less trade and foreign investment, more corruption, less equality, less political liberty, less education, less financial depth, and less domestic investment than other nations that are less well endowed with or less independent on natural resources. So, it's a systemic phenomenon in which diverse capital formation is suppressed. Not long ago, we had the professors of the University of Kinshasa lamenting on their conditions that there is no human capital development happening, and their conditions, they are being left, they feel like they are, lagging behind in many instances, and they were making a declaration to the government to look into their situation. So you see in many aspects that there are problems that need to be addressed. And we came up with this hypothesis. Cobalt and coltan extraction practices not only undermine economic growth, as per Elisee, but also all 5 forms of capital, does sustainable development. And we, because of the complexity of the situation, because of the the numerous factors that we had to take into account, then the methodology that we used was systems analysis. We thought if we use systems thinking in studying this phenomenon, we will be able to shed some light. Now, systems thinking, just to elaborate on the methodology. So this based on previous research in collaboration with other researchers, we embrace this 6-step approach of systems analysis. So the first step will be, I will be telling you the story of the resource curse and the economic development. We'll be developing in the second step, the behavior over time graph, just to see the trends and how, what is happening in the DRC. And we'll be creating a focusing statement so that we know what is it that we are going to be focusing on. And on step 4, I will be identifying an underlying pattern or structure. And I think my Professor Von Blottnitz will touch on that. And step 5, we will be doing some deeper analysis of the situation. And we are not going to make any interventions. We are believing that in the future research, people will be able to come up with interventions, or the decision makers or the stakeholders, including companies and the Congolese community. Now, telling you the story. Actually, the resource curse, as it plays out in the DRC, is an old story. It's actually, research is being done on this aspect of things. And, the situation is that minerals are exploited to the detriment of the people. There are many multinational corporations that work in the country, including Chinese companies and companies from almost everywhere, even a company from South Africa. And, but there is this Jecamines, which is a state-owned company, which has almost a monopolistic behavior. And it was not long ago said to, in some ways, run a parallel administration to the public sector. And so we have, in the mining sector, actually, we have human rights abuses, we have problems of child labor, we have warlords who, collect imports in certain areas, especially in the East. They collect tax, they do their own things. We have, we will see that we have many problems. And just to give you a picture of what is happening, I like this this cartoon here. What would you think the gentleman on top of the wealth is? It says the multinational corporations, you see? So a country is so laden in natural resources and yet so poor. You see on one side, we have, numerous people who must have died because of the predicament in the country. And reports show that over 10 million people have been killed in 20 years because of the political instability, the war, and the conflict related to blood, minerals, and the situation is very dire, is need to be looked at. Now, having heard the story, you could be asking yourself, now, the DRC with so much wealth, is it a resource curse to have so much, playing out in that country, or is it a blessing? And so just to exemplify this, to see two schools of thoughts that we find when we do research, when we talk to the community, when we engage with the Congolese, I want to give you these two examples. On one side, we've got a church leader who came up with this analysis, saying that there is a danger of balkanization, which is real today in the Congo. And he gave an account of what is happening there. He spoke about the use of force, fraudulent elections, two-speed justice, and quarrels between politicians, and what is, the paralysis of government intervention. He spoke about many things. Just to say the least, he gave a pessimistic view of what is happening in the DRC. Cardinal Fridolin Ambongo, recently on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the independence of DRC, gave this picture of a very dark picture of what is happening in the DRC. On the other side, and this is also what is happening in the community, you find that there are people who are optimistic. We've got the citizen #1 who gave this analysis. Despite the difficulties that the country has, according to him, there is a bright prospect for the DRC if policies are followed. For example, he said, what is very important here, the state of law. So we had not long ago a 100-day project on prefab housing that cost the government 57 million US dollars, sometimes 66 up to 66 million US dollars, and of which a huge amount is unaccounted for. And we've got for the first time convictions. So people were convicted and they are jailed for 20 years or so, depending on the case. So you see, the approach of people first, what we know in South Africa as Bantu Pele, what the current government is trying to embrace, and for example, giving free education to people and many other things. But what is very important as well here is also the citizen number one, President Felix Tshisekedi, also recognized that there's been a huge loss in average revenue per person in the Congo. Whereas in 1960s, in average, the revenue was 1,000 US dollar per person. Today, it's 400 US dollars per person. So we've got like 60% loss in revenue per person in the Congo in 60 years. What a loss. But what is very important here, I want to show you that as far as the Congo is concerned, we've got two views that converge on one fact. The resource curse is playing out in the DRC. We're going to see later with other analysis. Now, the question that comes to my mind is, will the past repeat itself? With the semi-democratic transition in 2019, is there a reason to believe that patterns of the past can be suppressed or mistakes not repeated? Well, we'll see. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the behavior over time. And we've got this output, this data showing that, yes, the country had a plethora of problems. And there was from 1996, there was a war in the country. But even in this situation, there were some development on social grounds. As we see the expected years of schooling that improved, we see the trend is improved to 8 years, which is like your second year at high school in the DRC. And we've got the many years of schooling, which was also significantly improved from 2 to 6 years. And we've got the Human Development Index value, which also improved. I told you the Gini index of the country is 42.2, yes, which makes, still makes the country as poor. But you know what? In 20 years, it's the biggest improvement the country have ever had in 20 years. And we've got also improvement that I was telling you about the Human Development Index in the DRC and its education components. So let's see now the health and economic constituents of the DRC's Human Development Index. There as well, the country has some significant improvement in life expectancy, which also improved. From 50 to 60, actually, men live 60 years and women live 62 years, a little bit longer than men. Probably because, men as well are caught in the business of war, in the problem of war and conflicts, and the condition is very, very dire. And we've got also improvement on the Gini per capita, as I mentioned earlier in 2011, which also improved tremendously. We see the trend, although there was a drop in 1995, but it picked up. And so we've got also an improvement there. Just to put this into perspective, I want to explain one thing. In 2010, the Bretton Woods institutions wrote off you know, the debt, the national debt of the DRC to a large extent, you know, like 12.3 billion US dollars were written off, which included actually 11 billion under the heavy indebted poor countries initiative and 1.2 billion under the relief initiative, the under debt relief initiative. And that helped a lot the country, as after that we see in 2010, the economy picked up, and we'll see more later as we look at other outputs. Now, just to see how the performance, to tell you about a little bit more about the performance of the DRC strategic minerals. In 2016, the DRC alone produced 46,000 tons of cobalt. You can see other countries, you know, South Africa produced 2,500 tons, with Zambia 2,000. So it outperformed all the major cobalt producing countries. And you see just one country, the DRC, produced 59% of the global production of cobalt in 2016. That was very significant. And yes, just to tell you more about the output, as I explained, the cobalt production, even today, you can see that the trend is upgoing, although there are, sometimes we see during the elections, there are problems and the demand decreases, and that affects the production. But when there is a relative stability, it picks up, as we see on that graph on your you know, far left. So cobalt is mined at industrial scale in the DRC, and we'll see later that coltan is mined artisanally. So just explain that to you, and we see that mining actually is you know, dominated by foreign-owned companies. We see on the slides companies like you know, Glencore. We have even Jinshua, a Chinese company. We've got Mitorex, a South African company. So all these companies that are there. So the distribution of the revenues, you know, generated in these activities, one wonder if the population of the DRC have a stake, and to what extent. Just to tell you a little bit about the coltan production, the DRC actually, you know, in general, globally, let's say starts globally. So almost 60% of your coltan is mined directly, but we also have like, you know, 24% of your coltan that comes from your recycling activities, and 10% comes from the stock. And in the DRC, coltan as well, despite during the world economic crisis, despite the crisis, the DRC outperformed other countries on the coltan production because of there was a demand, you know, for this mineral. But in 2009, after the effects of this global economic crisis, because of the effects of this global economic crisis, things started to go down. But as I explained, in 2010, there was this huge debt that was written off, and this helped the economy to pick up, and the production as well. There was a huge demand in coltan, and then the peak was in 2014. So that is the situation for coltan in the DRC. Now, just to tell you the focusing statement, you know, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to understand one thing. Why is a country so rich in natural resources, in minerals, in geo-resources, be one of the poorest in the world. We were trying to focus on that. This is trying to unpack that, we're trying to understand. And we hope that through the discussions, we will be able to elaborate on certain things that you will be willing to know on this aspect. And yes, just to finish before I give to Professor Harro to continue, I just want to give you this quote from Paul Collier, who argues that development based on natural resource extraction is possible, and even that it can be faster for resource-rich countries. The good example is Botswana, which is doing very well on mineral beneficiation, diamond beneficiation, but also that it is more sensitive to policy choices than development based on other resources, or other strategies. Now the question comes from, I'm going to throw a question to you. Which governance and policy choices in relation to cobalt and coltan would be most important and effective to overcome the resource curse? And with that, please help me to welcome a giant, Professor Harro from Blottnitz, who's going to continue with the analysis and deeper insight on this study. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Elisee. I think we'll just continue from the same slides. I will just speak to them and I'll ask you to just advance them when I'm ready to advance them. So we've gone through the first couple of steps of the systems analysis methodology. We've heard a lot about the types of trees in this forest and the story in step one, telling the story. And we've looked at some of the trends of development in the last 20 years or so, and also the trends in output of the two minerals under investigation here. And we've now tried to focus the question to this one here. That gives us a way out of the resource curse, potentially. And in order to work out what's been going on, we now look at the underlying patterns, and specifically in relation to coltan and to cobalt. So let's look at the next slide, please. So this is a very simple example of what we call a causal loop diagram. And we apply it to the conflict situation in the east of the DRC, which is well established, and there's been a very important paper in 2017 by some international researchers, I think Berman and Als, the reference, who have conclusively shown that when the price of such minerals goes up, please stay there, when the price of such minerals goes up, the amount of conflict goes up. But what this diagram essentially shows you is the vicious loop, where when you have warlords capturing a mine, they are able to extract more minerals and sell more minerals, with which they get more money and with which they can buy arms and recruit fighters and then capture another mine. And so if such behavior is not checked, then it will grow exponentially. Now, fortunately, we have not seen an exponential growth of this behavior recently. So something has checked this vicious loop that can easily develop. So now I can go to a slightly extended version of this vicious loop, which is involving also smuggling across the borders from the east to the neighboring countries. They have been identified in previous studies to have involvement in the extraction of not just coltan, the 3 T's and G are often talked about, but Rwanda is a major producer of coltan, and it's a small country, and so the question is, where does all that come from? But you know, the same vicious loop may happen in that the money may cross the border in the opposite direction to the coltan, and there would be you know, continued extraction because the resources are mobilized to fund fund those armed groups to keep extracting the resource. So this is the picture around coltan. It's pretty conclusive in the international literature that it is a driver of conflict and therefore also undermines development. Now we can turn our attention to cobalt. And the next slide, please, Elisee, if you are there. I'm just taking your video off. If you can give us the cobalt picture, please. Thank you. So for cobalt, you will recall that growth curve, and it's not a smooth growth curve, but one that steps up every couple of years. And that is every time a big new mine is opened. So cobalt is produced industrially in the main. There are a lot of artisanal miners in and around the industrial scale mines, but it grows in leaps and bounds. But that growth in its trend is indicative also of a reinforcing loop, and we explain this loop here through the classic profit accumulation. So I guess where does one start on this diagram? Let's start with new mine establishment on the left. Bottom left, you have a new mine establishment. That is, of course, driven by the global demand for cobalt. When we have a new mine establishing, after a while, the output of cobalt increases. You follow the arrow. That in turn yields more profit to the multinationals or the mine owners, and they can be local based or multinational, but happen mostly to be multinationals. A lot of that profit becomes returns to the foreign shareholders and is a dead end. But there is some reinvestment. Well, firstly, there's some rent paid to the DRC government, and that is a bone of contention at the moment. We'll pay a bit more attention to that. But that rent which it pays allows then the government to strengthen its position, also in relation to the mining companies. Some of it gets diluted on other spend, but ultimately the government can use that to make the investment climate a little bit more conducive for foreign direct investment, which would then finance exploration activity and which would lead to new mine establishment. So you have in the main a potential reinforcing loop, which would indicate that the future of cobalt mining in the DRC is looking quite bright if this reinforcing loop holds, and it certainly has held over the last 10 years or so, in that the output trend has been upwards. So this is, and as I said before, once a systems thinker has told you it's a forest, you just say, yeah, of course it's a forest. I knew this all along. So sorry if that was disappointing. But of course there are caveats. All of the linkages in this diagram are not naturally given, and they may be undermined. Anyway, so now we've explained the increase in cobalt, and of course the global demand is very important in that. So we can go to the next slide, please. Now that the trick in systems analysis is to go a little bit deeper, and we're still scratching the surface in some ways, but we want to propose to you, and we have done so already for the last year as we think about this, the following diagram. Elisee, if you can give that to us. So we now put these two loops next to each other. And on the left, we then have the cobalt loop, and it's much, much bigger than the coltan loop on the right. So output from the DRC is now topping 100,000 tons a year. The LME price when I looked last Friday was $28,000 US. And so, overall, this industry is worth 125 billion or so US dollars a year. Of course, only a small portion of that ends up in the hands of the DRC government. They want 10% in the new mining code. They had 2% in the old code. So, use the percentage you think they do get and put the billions there. But it is money that the Congolese government can use to fund development, and probably has to some extent used in the past decade. when the red arrow shows that a portion of that spend can be used to pacify the rest of Turnbelt and the areas in which the rebels are active. Of course, it's not only the spend by the Congolese government itself that has tried to pacify the situation. There have been interventions by the international community of different kinds. There have been peacekeeping missions. There have been the extractives initiatives. There has been the legal approach by the U.S. government, and to trace traceability of conflict minerals and all that. So a number of different things have squeezed down that loop. But just look at the numbers. The amount of coltan is the order of 1,000 tons. It is much more valuable than cobalt at $200,000 a ton. So, a potato sack full of this stuff will earn you a good couple of dollars. And if we estimate the rebels to get, 10% of the value, that would still be 20 million a year, and you can buy a lot of guns with that. But I think the relation of the two is important, and what we think may happen, and the argument we're really wanting to make here is that whilst you got to be very careful about whose coltan you buy, because that might very well fuel conflict. If you're Elon Musk and you need cobalt, maybe it's not a bad thing to buy it from the DRC, as long as you insist that it's not going to be looted and that a good portion of it ends up funding the things that the people really need, which is education and health spend. So, and maybe a little bit spend on security in a way that it can suppress conflict. And that, I think, takes us to the final slide, which is the conclusion that we have reached so far in this study. So the first bullet point is what you already know. But what you maybe hadn't seen as such is that there has been good progress on the social grounds. Not so much on the economic yet, but the social indicators are on the up. Maybe they were getting a little bit tired towards the end of the past decade, and the change of government is maybe giving a new impetus, and we can hopefully see those social indicators pick up speed again. Secondly, whilst cobalt and coltan to the non-initiate, in this crowd everybody knows the difference, but out there they sound like the same thing, and they're two minerals from a country that's in conflict, just don't touch them. I think what we're saying is the dynamics in relation to develop may differ very strongly. Whilst the one remains a curse, the other one may have contributed to some of the socioeconomic gains. Of course, one's always got to be very careful about organized looting and grand scale corruption around sums of money of that scale. So that remains a potential curse. And then, lastly, just this was in the forum recently by our colleagues. This last bullet point, the challenge to the new mining code. Of course, a lot of money is at stake. But maybe just to throw a weight in behind the government on behalf of the people, and hopefully the government on behalf of the people. Development and sustainable development needs strength in all the capitals, in human capital, in social capital, which is good governance, in natural capital, you can't wreck it, and in financial capital and in built capital. And so, maybe more of that finance that's liberated needs to end up in the different capitals in the DRC rather than in bank accounts in Switzerland. And I think with that, we can close the presentation. Elisee, I've had the grand opportunity to put the conclusions across, and maybe you want to say a final word before we go to questions.
Yes, thank you very much for your contribution, Professor. And yes, this is the work we are doing, and we'll be taking questions. If there is any question about the DRC or about the methodology, about the study, please feel free to ask them. I would like to ask you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind. Say your profession, your work as you write your question, and I'll ask Aysha to then tell us, if you're willing, that we maybe it can help us to give you a proper answer to your question. But in case you want to be anonymous, feel free to do so as well. Yes. So, Aysha, over to you.
Thank you. I would just like to thank you both for your presentation as well. It's definitely overwhelming to see how dependent we are on the DRC for our modern society and building everything, and not actually really having a sense of obligation towards that country to make sure that there is some sort of sustainable development. So I really do appreciate the presentation, and we received a lot of comments from the chat as well, commending both of you for your presentation. One of the questions is kind of regarding the stakeholder activism and how we can then, from our side, not allow the looting to continue. And then also just commenting on the systems analysis and how the systems thinking rather is really beneficial and should potentially be brought to the attention of the government of the DRC, or presented there in some sort of forum as well. So I'll just repeat the question because now I rambled on a bit, but it's regarding how does one approach and reach stakeholders and ensure that looting doesn't continue in the DRC? I suppose that's the big question that everyone has, but yeah.
Okay, I'll start, then Prof will continue after me. We need to continuously talk about it. We need to disseminate the information what we are doing this research, but also people need at their own level as well to spread the news, to talk about, to talk against the human rights abuses in the DRC, and to write about it, to engage, to actually, because it has been for a very long time a top-down approach, but now I think we need to give the voice to the people. A bottom-up approach where people, the grassroots, the ordinary Congolese, that will be also given a voice. Yeah, that's what I can say about it.
Thank you.
Aysha, I'd like to answer that question from a systems analysis perspective. One of the sentences I dropped in an email to Elisee when he joined us about systems analysis is, once you embrace systems analysis, you get away from the urge to blame individuals for the bad things that happen. So you just say the system made them do it. But that's what the resource curse says. It says regardless of who's there, if there are riches to be grabbed, somebody will try to grab them. And so you can change the people, the behavior will continue, just because that's the nature of the setup. So, you know, how do you prevent the looting to continue is you need to understand the drivers in these vicious cycles, and you need to disrupt those drivers. So the accumulation of wealth that allows a reinvestment into the means of looting, whether those means of looting are guns in the case of Coltan, or whether those means of looting are nasty lawyers in the case of the multinationals, you need to slow down the accumulation of wealth to the looter. Okay, so that would be one of the system's answers.
Thank you, Harro. So we have another question. Well, I suppose this is what Byelongo was speaking about, is what is the responsibility of the Congolese people, and how do individuals then step forward and internalize the kind of responsibility and accountability that they might have?
I may add something on that. The responsibility of the Congolese people and other stakeholders, actually, first, as Prof mentioned, is not a responsibility of one person. So it's not going to be a blame game. but it is a if you want, a shared responsibility. And because the problem there is systemic in nature, and it needs to be addressed holistically, not only by introducing one single policy, but we need to have a holistic picture of what is happening there. But what individuals can do, and again, not only individuals, what people can do are, who have interest in what's happening there, is actually to have strong institutions. Barack Obama once said that Africa does not need strong leaders or visionary leaders per se only, but Africa needs strong institutions. As Prof was saying, if you can change, people can change, the individuals. But if the system remains the same, not much is going to be changing as the years go on. So yeah, that's what I would say. So yes, it's a shared responsibility. Yes.
Thank you. Harro, do you want to have, we have someone with a hand up, but Harro, would you like to address that question first, or shall we hand over to Dominique?
You can hand over. I typed a little additional comment to the chat.
I want to see, okay, there we go.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, and it was really a privilege to attend this conference, and then I was very curious to hear about what are they going to talk about DRC, because personally I'm from DRC Congo, and 2 weeks back I went to visit my country, and I was a little bit curious to go to Kolwezi, because I think the doctor knows Kolwezi where it's located. Yes. So I tried to I just wanted to add on what Prof was explaining about the looting and the system. I approach different people and try to question them about what is going on, especially in the business of Coltan and Cobalt. I believe the problem that we're having in the DRC is the same problem that we can face all around the world, especially people. Let's take an example of someone who stole a phone, and then yet you walk along the street and then approach someone to sell that cell phone, and the person accept to buy. So is the society that is allowing those kind of looting? Because let's say if the government itself can be able to write a policy whereby they have to make sure the police or the army have to protect the Coltan, I think taking things so serious to kindly control those kind of problems. Because I saw it with my eyes, like we have so many illegal people are trying to get the same Coltan, and even though it's risky, but people are doing things that you can't believe, like these are human doing such things. So we having a serious challenge, and the society as well is encouraging those problems. I think that was the point that I wanted to add to this matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. If there's anyone else that would also like to speak to the panel directly, you can raise your hand by hovering your cursor over your name, if I'm correct. I think that's how it works. But otherwise, we have another question. Accountability reinforced through the tracing of commodity, like it is done for diamond and coltan, should lead to cobalt, which is now turning out to be a strategic resource due to its demand. What do you think this relates to how China is doing business in the DRC, given it has become a key partner in the DRC government?
That's a good question. Yes, in the mining business, accountability is a huge problem. But internationally, there have been instruments that were devised to help answer the issue of accountability and to stop the blood minerals from trading. We have the Kimberley process that mostly focus on diamond, but also could also help with other blood minerals. but it wasn't applicable to very much to coltan and cobalt per se. And so although it addressed to some extent the problem, it did not solve it. So there is a need of new instruments, new policies, new international protocols, I would say, in this regard. We've got the Dodd-Frank Act that was also put there, to help the Obama law that was put there to help curb this problem. But again, you see these instruments were more or less top-down orientated. The decision makers, authorities, international organizations, mining companies came together and decided. But as my colleague, I think it's Robert Bitumba said, that the society has also a role to play. So they need to be, that's why I advocated for a bottom-up approach, whereby new instruments will be decided upon, and including a voice from the society, from the community, from the ordinary people. And yes, because of not having strong institutions in the country, China took advantage of that situation. As Prof was saying, if there is a wealth lying somewhere, someone will try to take it, and that's what's happening actually. And because of non-respect of human rights from past experience, we see that the authorities then decided to turn to China instead of doing business with America, because now we've got the Dodd-Frank Act and other regulations trying to stop illicit trade and cooperation. Then they turn to China, and China seems to have this approach of friendship with Africa, where they close their eyes, on human rights abuses and atrocities, and they do business just as the opportunity presents itself. I think that must stop, and there should be a process of engaging all the stakeholders, hopefully with the current government, which wants a state of law. Hopefully something is going to come forth.
So on that note, I have Robert Butumba I put his hand up, so maybe he can step in and speak to that point as well. But then unfortunately, I just realized that we're 2 minutes over. So let's do a quick comment from Robert, and then maybe just hand over for closing remarks. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much, Elisee and Prof. Harro, for the presentation. Yeah, it's a pity. It could have been a long debate and discussion, and I'm so excited when I have to talk about DRC and everything that is happening out there. Yeah, but just in a nutshell, what I wanted to comment is that since the early colonialization of DRC, it have always been something. DRC have always have any kind of resources that the world is seeking. It started with the rubber and ivory, uranium. Now we're talking about coltan, we're talking about cobalt, and in the future we talk about rare earth. We're not really talking about it, but in the Kivu, there are a lot of rare earth, so that will be for sure thought after in the future. And one also of the biggest assets is water. We're not really talking about it, but water will be something that people will be looking for it in the future. And the DRC being both on the northern and the southern hemisphere, there will always be water in the Congo basin. Chad is looking for it, Libya was looking for it, South Africa also looking for water. Electricity is also another thing. So there will always be something that DRC will be ready to offer. But the responsibility is on both hands. Locally, the governance need to be improved, but also internationally, there's generally a big fight between the Western countries, since the beginning, when it was the country belonged to Leopold, the King of Belgium, he allowed many actors, international actors, to intervene in DRC because he could not handle everything by himself. But since then, there's always the balance of power, Eastern with Russia and the United States fighting, killing leaders who are nationalists. So the things now is to establish a good governance locally, but also internationally. You need to have the DRC need to be positioned in a way where all those international power we fund and interest to proper and well-managed DRC. This is one of the issues that we currently have. Also to cover a bit on cobalt, in the period to 1990s, we used to export metal cobalt, but now people are just selling concentrates. And understand that people need cobalt salt and no longer cobalt as a metal. But yeah, if you are exporting concentrate that is 20% in cobalt, so you need to fund, you have an interest in funding in many of the elements that are hidden in it. We have the same problem with Belgium, exporting copper to Belgium to be refined there. But in fact, they were also collecting gold and a lot of metal, cadmium and so on. Yeah. Chinese are also doing the same, exporting cobalt, but a lot of also elements incorporated in the concentrate that are being exported. So a lot to talk about, but yeah, maybe we have another opportunity to discuss.
Thanks so much, Robert, for attending and offering your insight there. I would like to thank the panelists, both Harro and Byelongo. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really informative, and it's good to get a systems analysis of this issue. Yeah, thank you so much, and everyone enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.
Thank you for the opportunity.